Today, my presentation hopes to tell you kind of the story of how the Guggenheim as a case study got started on social media, where we are, how we arrived, and then I hope to also deliver a code of best practices that I hope will be applicable to your institutions as well. And the obvious notion that every institution is very different. The main thing to keep in mind is every institution, of course, needs a strategy that is applicable to theirs. So, moving kind of into the past, this is the Guggenheim when the museum first opened in 1959 at Partiendo. So it's a United States museum, privately funded, of mostly modern and contemporary art. It was based on the private collection of Solomon R. Guggenheim, who was a prominent art collector of what they called non-objective painting. So it was primarily his vast collection of Kandinsky, Chagall, Leger. So most of those works are prominent in our collection, and they're kind of the biggest attractions to why people visit the Guggenheim today. And today in 2015, our museum does 3 major exhibitions a year in the Rotunda space. We also have a tower gallery for smaller, sometimes more contemporary art exhibitions. And our museum as well is global. We've been expanding, as you might know, to other locations. We also collect a global selection of contemporary artists. So even just recently, last year, we had an exhibition on Latin American contemporary art. Many artists who are from Argentina, so Martin Mini was at the exhibition. We also collect Adriana Rojas and among other artists in Latin America, such as Luis Chemnitzer, Gabriel Sierra, Malefica. So we're kind of expanding into other regions of the world as well as a global institution. And I think today, in terms of audience too, something to keep in mind is that, of course, most people come to the Guggenheim, we know, to experience the building. So we say the building is probably the most important work in our collection. And it's very international in terms of attendance too. So about 70% of our visitors come from outside of the United States. They're usually tourists. Many of them don't speak English. Many of them are coming from abroad. So today we have 3 major museums open across the world. Of course, the museum in New York, and then a museum in Bilbao that was designed by Frank Gehry, opened in 1996. In Venice, Peggy Guggenheim's collection in her Palazzo in Venice is now a permanent museum. In development, we also have a museum developing in Abu Dhabi, in the Middle East. Also designed by Frank Gehry, slated to open many years from now. And we're also in the process of exploring a museum in Helsinki, Finland. So there's an architecture competition in place now to determine who will design kind of this future museum in kind of our next region of the world. So over the past 50 plus years, we've witnessed a sea change in terms of globalization, and that's impacted staffing as well. So yesterday, Diana presented kind of the notion of traditionally when you think of jobs, you have curators, educators, conservators, and today these are actually real jobs that exist both at my museum and also other institutions. So you have digital curators, digital conservators, educators who are responsible for creating content online, and then in marketing too, we're now kind of labeled these digital marketing professionals, and they're chief digital officers, heads of digital transformation, so it's impacting the way we staff our museums, of course. So my position specifically at the Guggenheim, I've been there since 2010. Started in traditional marketing, but of course it's evolved, and we now call it digital marketing, which is still part of the marketing department under the umbrella of communications. And that includes PR, website, marketing, and also we're digital media producers. So I think many of you kind of do all of our jobs as one person, but in terms of wear many hats. But I think just to clarify my role, so I manage social media among several other things too, including email marketing, online advertising, search engine marketing, and also just overall digital content strategy.
So this is my digital team. So it's me and my colleague Grace, who's actually from Buenos Aires. And fortunately, she couldn't be here, but she is the new hire that we brought on the team to kind of facilitate this digital expansion. And kind of across the board, unlike many other institutions, we don't necessarily have a digital department. We're kind of digital throughout the museum. So we have staff who are involved in digital projects in education, archives, curators, or kind of spread throughout the institution. So also going back to the way museums used to communicate to the public. So traditionally, you have these exercises of a very singular way of communicating, either through presenting exhibitions, publications, even sending a press release, releasing a print ad. It's a very one-way approach. So you send out your press release, you're done. You send out your print ad, you're done. And museums kind of had this authority and kind of one-way direction of communicating with the world. And today, because of digital technology, social media, it's a very two-way exchange between the museum and the user. And that's a relationship that one addresses through anything that's digital. It's constantly evolving. There's no end product. You're continually tweaking, optimizing, and improving upon your strategy, because as professionals, we're trying to keep up with the pace of how technology is evolving. And it's through communicating with the public, but also being very on top of trends. So even in journalism too, I didn't go to the panel yesterday, but many journalists, as we know, are on Twitter, so there's this complete dialogue between social media, PR, the website, so all of it is kind of this large ecosystem that you're trying to manage in a feedback loop. So currently the Guggenheim is on many social networks, but of course we didn't launch everything at once, and that's something important to keep in mind too, because you don't necessarily need to be on every platform. It's really about what your institution's goals are and whether or not these platforms address your goals. And since 2007, if anyone remembers MySpace, that was our first social media platform. We don't really have it anymore, but over the years kind of evolved with our needs too, depending on the project. So over time, we kind of added more social media platforms as we've added more resources and more staff, because of course it takes a very large commitment of time to manage networks. And social media is also a very quickly changing beast, and it's our job to really keep up with all of the trends. So across all of the museums, so not just New York, Bilbao, Venice, also special projects, we now have 25 total social media sites, which is a lot, and it includes Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, which are kind of the three platforms I'll focus on today, because they're our most active and also kind of the most popular globally, I would say. But yeah, we're also on YouTube, Google+, Pinterest, etc. On site at the museum, we get about 1 million visitors per year in New York City. So it's kind of, in terms of the physical capacity of the building, we're almost maxing out in visitors. If you've ever come to the museum, you'll notice it's very crowded. There are a lot of tourists, and it's not the most desirable museum experience. So how do we expand our mission beyond the physical reach of our building? So the opportunity for us has been online. So on social media, you'll see that our reach is now double the annual attendance of the people who come to the physical building. And then many of them who follow us live outside of the United States. Many of them have never even visited the Guggenheim, though they're interested in modern contemporary art. It's essentially an opportunity to feed our mission through these channels where users already are. So we've seen tremendous growth over the past, I'd say like 6 years since Twitter launched. So the growth has been exponential, and we often leverage these statistics for fundraising reports. It's a very important metric to have when we're trying to get funding for projects, for grants, for sponsorships. So social media has also fueled the development of our own programs. And I think if you look at worldwide where other museums are, of course, many of the top in terms of museum following is very centrally located within the US and the UK. So the very large museums in the US like MoMA, Smithsonian, even Tate, I think there's a correlation between the size of the museum, of course, and also their team. And very similar for Facebook too. It's been around a little bit longer, but I think it's still very aligned with even physical attendance in the building. So there are a few kind of outliers out here. So you might even see, many of these are Western museums, but then there's the Museum of Islamic Art in Qatar that has like over 1 million followers, and they're a very new museum. So some of the patterns we're seeing too is museums with very high resources financially are able to invest in Facebook, Twitter advertising to gain a lot of followers very quickly. So, financially, in terms of resources, there's going to be a displacement in terms of where museums have their global reach because of advertising. And then Instagram, which is one of the newer platforms, is mostly dominated in the US. Most of the top museums are in the United States or the UK. And I think a lot of museums are still developing opportunities because it's such a visual platform too. I think there's kind of the most wide opportunity to expand arts education because it's filled with images. There's a lot of potential for museums to really grow on this platform. So how did we get here? We have a very large following. We're very global, and of course, most of it is because of brand recognition. We have all of these museums across the world, but I think what I'll present next is I think there are also just certain best practices that we've learned through either trial and error and also being this institution that's very active online. So I came up with 10 commandments of social media. Hopefully you can identify with some of these patterns, and also I look forward to hearing from you as well if you have any other tips to share with the group, because I think as professionals we're all kind of making this up as we go along. There's no book for this, there's no class, there's no like university degree for social media, so we're all kind of evolving together as employees of museums. So going back to just marketing 101, when you carry out any communications plan, of course, you have to know your audience. And for the Guggenheim, being conscious of where our audience lives is very important. So for example, on Twitter, we have a majority of our followers live outside of the United States, but because of language and also the nature of Twitter use in the US, about 50% of our followers do live in America, so our content tends to be tailored to local programming in contrast to other platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And then followed by that, we have a lot of kind of an even distribution of followers from Japan, the UK, Italy, China, kind of all over the world. On Facebook, we are actually more international, so you'll see that only 28% of our followers live in the United States. And also because of the very high use of social media in Latin America, we actually have a very large percentage, I would say, of fans who live in Brazil, Mexico, Argentina. And those numbers have also increased in correlation to content. We've started collecting more artists from Latin America, and most recently had an exhibition of Latin American contemporary art last summer. So I think that also fueled the growth. On Instagram, we're also skewing international, but mostly in the United States. Brazil is also a top country of users who like art and follow us on Instagram because it's quite high in usage, followed by Italy and the UK and Mexico. So what do we do with this information? Knowing your audience allows you to tailor your content to where those people are. And I think all of you might have pressure from, either you're like programming or events people, like, oh, we need people to come to this program, like, can you tweet it? And it's a very common misconception about kind of on-site and online, like, what are your goals? So knowing the distribution of our audience and how we communicate our programming, we have to strike a balance between all of the different audiences we serve, where they live, and our content strategy. So we kind of divide it up into an equal balance of exhibitions, the Guggenheim collection, the building, programs, and kind of other. So all of it is kind of based on your priority as a museum, right? So most of our programming in terms of what happens on site during an exhibition period is about promoting a show. So the communications department, PR, marketing, they're like 100% dedicated to promoting an exhibition when it opens. But on social media, because of course not everyone can physically come to the museum, we try to balance it so that we're not exclusively talking about our shows. And additionally, we also know that many of them, because they don't live in New York City, we have to deliver content that's maybe digital, interactive. They can learn about the exhibition through a microsite, through a video, through a kind of virtual experience, either from home, even people who live in New York City, as a promotional tool to experience the exhibition before you arrive. In terms of events, we try to limit and scale back on the number of on-site events that we actually promote, because we know many people don't live in the city. So sometimes you also have the opportunity, depending on the platform, to target your posts to just people who live in those regions. So we do that often for Facebook. Whenever we promote on-site programming, we say that only people can see this if they live within 50 miles of New York City. The Guggenheim collection is actually the biggest draw of the museum, and physically in the space, if you've ever visited, the permanent collection is actually only on view in a very small gallery. And in most museums, you'll often see, maybe if it's a collecting museum, less than 5% of their collection actually on view, like in the galleries. So the online space is a tremendous opportunity to expand all of our digital assets with respect to the art we collect and why we collect it online. So we have about 1,500 objects that are available on our website, guggenheim.org. You can explore the collection either through the website or through our app. And people really just want to see art. They can't come to the museum and see this sculpture, but they can see it online and learn about the artist. An often popular way to connect an artist on social media is to celebrate their birthday. So it's a very relevant way to say, like, oh, we're celebrating this artist, and then kind of giving them more information as a point of access to dig deeper into another piece of content that's online on your website. So like I said, the most popular work of art in our collection is the Frank Lloyd Wright building. Architecture is incredibly interesting, but also accessible for anyone who maybe doesn't have an art background. When you come into the building, the first thing you do is whip out your phone because you want a picture of the rotunda. It's such a unique, iconic space of architecture. And in terms of how we communicate the building, our communication staff, are very devoted to promoting current exhibitions, current programs, but really have nobody dedicated to the building. It's not an active, I would say, program. It's a very evergreen piece of content, but on social media, it's incredibly popular, and also we know the #1 driver of why people come to the museum. So we initiated this new series called Frank Lloyd Wright Fridays as an excuse to celebrate the building every Friday. And I think it helps just really break up our content strategy and have ways to kind of serve all of our audiences in our editorial schedule. So we also cover content from the other museums in Bilbao and Venice, as well as their programming, especially if there's overlap. The New York Museum drives most of the programming, so sometimes an exhibition will travel from one museum to another. So we'll follow the promotion through installation views, shared digital assets that are developed for those exhibitions. And then also the museums have dedicated feeds, so they have their own suite of social networks to communicate with their own audiences. So in Bilbao, they'll tweet in Spanish, and in Italy, they'll do English and Italian. Social media is also a news feed, so we often communicate anything that's happening at the museum on site, but also globally. So sharing initiatives that are happening kind of throughout the world, it really keeps you up to date. So this is a news story about our activity in Helsinki. And traditionally, these notices would only go to members of the press, but now that we're kind of a very democratized platform, the news goes to anyone who opts in to follow us online. Number two, so even more important than knowing your audience, it's tailoring your content to each platform. And I think because all of these platforms have their nuances and are evolving very quickly, it's important to know how they work and how they'll benefit your content, especially as a user. So Twitter, because it's very conversational, we have exercised things like Twitter Q&As with curators. And it's an opportunity to talk directly to a Guggenheim curator online. Anyone can ask a question. We've hosted these in conjunction with our exhibitions, sometimes in partnership with another media outlet such as like Art Info, if it's photography, like Time Magazine, kind of to really expand the reach of our content. On Facebook, because it's quite visual, every post, of course, accompanies an image. And of course, our two biggest attractions are Frank Lloyd Wright and Kandinsky. So anytime we do post kind of our core mission messaging, it's incredibly popular online, and it's also a very evergreen way to celebrate the identity of the Guggenheim. On Instagram, because it's a very visual platform as well, it's an opportunity to share your richest images, but also host on-site events to connect the on-site and online. So on the left, this is a screenshot from an Instagram meetup that we organized at the Guggenheim to kind of invite a lot of influencers, really active social media users on Instagram, to come to the Guggenheim before it opened to really celebrate the architecture, and this was on the building anniversary. So we invited all of these Instagrammers to come in during empty Guggenheim before all the visitors came in, so it was a tremendous way to celebrate the building. For our gala, this was in last fall, we collaborated with Dior, who was the sponsor, and of course Instagram, because it has a much younger audience, had a very popular response online. Social media is not only about publishing and distributing content, and going back to the two-way dialogue diagram that I shared, listening is as important as publishing. So we do a lot of monitoring, even for media coverage, press coverage about the museum. So I'm sure all of you use TweetTech, so we're often tracking questions from users, audiences, comments, also sentiment, what they're posting about our exhibitions, whether or not there's any feedback. And we're also monitoring press, so our media relations department circulates press coverage to senior staff. So among exhibition reviews in the New York Times, they'll now also include tweets because it's news. And it's as important in some ways as journalism. And social media has also been a way for us to track there isn't that much breaking news in the art world, but sometimes when it happens, you see it first on Twitter before Google alerts, any of your media monitoring tools. So for example, when the artist Ankawara passed away last year, he has a retrospective right now at the Guggenheim. We were able to see it first on Twitter and then work with curators to draft a public response. Social media also has a very social component in terms of activism. So one artist that completely exemplifies that spirit is the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei. And when he was detained in 2011, the Guggenheim responded very publicly by creating an online petition asking for anyone in the world to sign online asking for his release from the Chinese government. So we were able to carry this out exclusively through social media and really connect with many other museums in kind of collaborating on this very social movement that was completely online. And when the artist was finally released, I specifically remember seeing it first on Twitter and being able to let everyone know. So it's such a quickly moving, but also immediate way of finding out what's happening in the news. So we also try to respond very quickly to users, and I think for very big museums, people are very surprised when they get a response from us. We're not just a bot. We're humans behind the Twitter feed. And sometimes it's as simple as like, are you open today? And we'll respond very quickly and help a visitor gain information for how to plan their visit. And sometimes we also receive comments and criticism such as your Wi-Fi isn't working, or I'm having problems with the Guggenheim app. So it's also a customer service tool. Furthermore, it's a very public tool. So of course, if you don't respond, sometimes you'll see comments kind of spiral out of control. So you nip it in the bud by trying to really keep on top of it as soon as possible. So number 4, collaboration is incredibly important, both internally and externally, in forming your content strategy and also working collaboratively with other museums and also the world at large, because you're this very public-facing institution online. So some examples of that internally, a lot of times social media is very isolated. Not everyone in your institution might be online or fluent, and I kind of position social media as a language. Very often you perceive that there's this other conversation happening and you don't really know what's going on until you actually participate, and it's kind of like learning the nuances of learning a new language. So I often encourage staff to do it themselves. So we've trained curators on how to tweet and use Instagram, and it's really changed the way we even receive content from them. I think teaching them the value of how to be fluent and practiced in that platform can really help us in return in terms of gaining content from those internal producers. So the key people we often reach out to are curators, educators, archivists. Monthly, we run a digital content coordination meeting with kind of every digital content producer in the institution. And it's a very strategic meeting really about content strategy, which often informs our editorial and social media strategy. And then bi-weekly, we'll meet kind of in a more tactical way. So there's a lot of internal collaboration, a lot of legwork that happens before you actually see content published online. And often, you need the content before the message. So it's a ton of work that happens in the planning process before you actually see it live on the social media platforms. So we've come a long way. The chief curator of the Guggenheim is actually on Twitter and Instagram. She's very active. I recommend that you follow her. As well as other curators who are focused on various parts of the world. So Alexandra Monroe is our Asian art curator. Pablo Leon de la Barra is our Latin American curator, who I think is very active kind of all over. Many of you know him. And we just recently hired a curator of architecture and digital initiatives. So he's charged with developing our architecture programming, but also connecting kind of digital media in the institution and how we connect content, both on-site and online. So we also work with, like I said, other affiliate partners. So for exhibitions that travel to Venice, for example, we'll share assets, so images, video, audio, pending any language consistencies. And another opportunity is also with traveling exhibitions that go to another venue, you also have the opportunity to link up with them when your show travels. Externally, there's also a very open, I would say, opportunity for collaboration with other museums online. I think social media has really opened the way museums talk to each other, and there's even a hashtag called Museum Love when museums talk back and forth about some type of common programming or artists. So it's a very friendly environment to work with other museums to expand your network and your content. So for example, we have the Guggenheim sometimes featured in other exhibitions, and there's like a very friendly banter that happens between institutions when you see your building featured on another feed. And then even going abroad, looking beyond the art world, we'll celebrate things like International Women's Day, where we celebrate international artists. And there are many instances of trending hashtags where you can take your content and go deeper into the world at large and kind of issues that impact popular culture. And next week, very timely, is Twitter's Museum Week initiative. It's a global Twitter initiative that's sponsored, supported by Twitter. Last year, it was exclusively part of European museums, but now it's a global initiative. So every day, there's a hashtag and a different topic, and all museums are invited to participate. So I think there are over 1,000 museums that are currently registered. So if you haven't registered yet, just Google like Museum Week, and you'll find a form to sign up, and then kind of really participate and try to work with other museums to share your content. Obviously, visitors love taking pictures, and we're in the age of the selfie and the age of mobile photography kind of verifying your existence. So the Guggenheim, according to CNN last year, was apparently the most photographed place in the world. So encouraging visitors to take pictures, and even if you have rights issues or have other barriers that are beyond your control, you might even see that even if you ban photography, visitors are going to take pictures anyway, and you see it on Instagram when you like search that hashtag. They're going to break the law no matter what, so just enable it. So immediately after we posted this, there's this like very clear like interest in coming to the Guggenheim, taking your picture. It's almost as if the selfie is the new souvenir. So you're kind of like identified. And our visitors have been very clever. For a Christopher Wool exhibition, this girl, is saying that she's not getting into trouble for taking selfies at the Guggenheim. Video is now an incredibly huge opportunity for social. We see a significant impact, of course, online on our websites, and also in advertising. You'll see that usually when you use video in any messaging and paid media campaigns, the click-through rate is 3 times higher than it is for any other static ad. So we know that video engages, and it also does a very good job of telling a story in art, because you have images that come to life. You have the ability to virtually experience a work of art, a show, and also the commentary that comes from the scholars and the authority that are associated with the museum. So video is now also social. YouTube's been around for a long time. It's the #2 biggest search engine after Google, which is enormous. So anytime you have video, it's incredibly important that you put it on many distribution platforms, including YouTube. Facebook is now incredibly prioritizing video too in their algorithm. You'll notice that their algorithm changes all the time, and right now it's prioritizing video. They have a new video player. On your page, you'll have a whole new video channel. And Twitter also just launched the capability of uploading your own video. The limit is 3 minutes now, and I think it's only limited to select advertisers, but they're going to eventually roll it out to the rest of Twitter users. So I think it's very critical to think about where your video goes and how you adapt it for multiple platforms. And thinking about the resources that go into video production, you have like video producers and you have editors, and it's an incredibly laborious process sometimes to create video for your website. And there's an opportunity to take that content and really splice it up into small pieces that are digestible. And it, again, depends on the platform. So say you have a video for your website, you also export it to YouTube. And then maybe you take part of that video, a few minutes, make it very short, put it on Facebook, and make it even shorter for 15 seconds, and then it could be used for Instagram. So there's a whole life cycle of video that can be adapted with existing resources. So going along that vein, it's important to also know that social media is just one component of your overall communication strategy, and it's all part of one large digital ecosystem. And as we know, social media is completely reliant upon the content that you push out there. And of course, everything has to really speak to each other in kind of a circle. And so you think about the platform and your content, you're the museum in the middle, and you create a ton of content for many users on site and online, but you have to be able to distribute it on all possible platforms, and it's about the user. It's about whether or not they are on social media. Sometimes they're not on any platforms and they like to receive email. Sometimes they're on your press list. Sometimes they're not even digital and they need a piece of direct mail in their mailbox. So upon kind of considering how you create content, it's also really important, like I said, to work with other departments and ensure integration fully across all platforms to ensure a really successful campaign. And it's, again, about the user, letting them choose where they consume the content. So social media is just one node across the entire ecosystem of digital. And in terms of integration, a few things to consider for platforms is that there's a continuous cycle of how a user uses the content that you create. So there are opportunities of very simple integration, such as making sure that social media is very present on your website, that it's integrated within your press releases, your email newsletters, any outgoing communication that's online. At the same time, you have to create a two-way exchange when they land on your website, whether or not they can find your social media accounts in return, and also be able to share it on their own platform. So it kind of is both ways. And then also on site, whether or not you encourage social media usage within your galleries is very important, because I think for many of you, I think most of your followers might be more local than ours, and the objective could be to create a connection between visitors who come to the museum and the visitors who share content online. So reporting is also incredibly important, but you also have to know what are the measures of your success. What was your goal? How do you reach that goal? And what are the metrics? And I think one could have a variety of different goals. Sometimes it's growth, sometimes it's engagement, being competitive among all the other museums that are in your region. Is your goal to measure website traffic? Is your goal sometimes unrealistically to sell tickets? Or is it just brand reputation and being able to have a voice on this platform? So in terms of tracking, there are various ways that you can communicate to your colleagues. And again, because social media isn't always incredibly prevalent throughout the institution, it's important to keep your colleagues very up to date. So at the Guggenheim, we send out a monthly social media tracking report that goes to anyone from senior staff to the director, very high level, updating them on our activities and kind of seeing like these are the opportunities and the projects that we've done, even if they're not active personally on those sites. And then weekly, we also do a lot of reports that are more tactical to optimize our results. And the numbers actually go to, people such as our CFO who manages the budget. And often when we do things like highlight any opportunities to track ROI, such as the social media campaign like drew X amount of ticket sales or memberships, those have been opportunities to really secure more funding for our projects. So really highlighting any success stories. More important, I would say, than knowing kind of best practices, being a really technologically savvy social media user, is knowing your museum and your institution above anything else. Beyond any tools and software, knowing your history, your collection, your mission, your institution is critical to being a good social media user. Essentially, you're representing all dimensions of the institution, and it's important to know who to go to for what, even if you don't know the answer. So as a result, you need someone who has a background in art, has fluency in both art history, kind of the content of the museum, as well as technology. And I think another common mistake that many institutions make is they'll assign social media to like an intern, because like, oh, you're young, you know how to use this. But you really need someone who has a deep, many of you might have done that, but you really need someone who has a deep grasp on the institution. And I think it's very visible when you do follow certain feeds that the maturity in understanding that museum does come out. So the Guggenheim is a very unique institution. So we have very unique architecture, distinct museums, and we have our own set of issues. But the important thing I would say is to kind of survey your own institution and think about what among your objectives and your mission, how that correlates to how you execute your digital content strategy and your social media strategy. And as, again, it's just one dimension within the whole communications ecosystem that I described. So most importantly, kind of to draw back big picture, a takeaway to always keep in the back of your mind is that social media is actually part of your mission. So going back to your organizational mission is very important in thinking about how you communicate that to the public. So as a museum, we're an educational institution. We're about public outreach, access, essentially bringing art to the world. And I think about that every time I do post something on social media. Is it about furthering our mission? Is it about arts education? Is it about helping people understand modern contemporary art, or is it something else? So I think having that mission very clear and having that very clear vision of what you're doing is incredibly important. So for the Guggenheim, we actually redrafted our mission pretty recently to also include digital platforms. I'm not going to read this to you because it's quite long, but as you can see, we do prioritize that we're an institution that puts on exhibitions and publications, and now another dimension of our outreach is reaching people through these digital platforms. So it could be social media, it could be our website, our app, kind of in this digital space. So what happens is you now have an entirely new audience that we're serving. They're essentially these non-visitors who have never come to the Guggenheim, never actually need to come to the Guggenheim because we're reaching them online. So as a result, we have kind of essentially a new destination. You have the physical brick and mortar institutions, New York, Bilbao, Venice, those are buildings. But then you have another destination that we've created through these digital platforms, connecting, I would say, all of the institutions and also the museum with the rest of the world. I saw this tweet the other day that really amused me, and I think if there was any doubt that social media is a critical part of changing the world, it's really self-evident in numbers. So Facebook now has 1.4 billion users, and that exceeds the entire population of China. And then kind of going down, you have India, this is another Chinese social network, Tencent. WhatsApp is hugely expanding in this region internationally. LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat are also very high in terms of developing kind of wider outreach. So, thank you.